Hi, how you doing? I'm getting ready to bring in various plants for the winter, and I thought I'd show you the process that I go through for the different kinds of plants that I have. My name is Sharon. I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. The weather has been absolutely amazing for the last week or so. Yesterday it got up to 30 degrees and it was a hot, dry day. Um, just absolutely gorgeous. But at the same time, the temperature went down to just around 5 or just below 5 degrees last night. So our days are numbered. And I do have a lot of plants that I like to bring in and winter in various ways. And I don't want to have to do that all at once because it becomes overwhelming if I do that. And so I like to work at it, starting around the end of September and going through for probably about 2 weeks. I like to at least get them prepared, and whether they need to stay here in the greenhouse or clustered somewhere else in the yard, I do like to get at it, get things cleaned up and get them ready and actually start bringing some in the house as well. So I'm going to go through a number of plants, tropicals, house plants, as well as, of course, geraniums, because I have a number of them and different kinds of them as well. Hanging geraniums or the ivy leaf geraniums, as well as zonal geraniums. And I have some regal geraniums that I picked up this year. So the different ways that I'm going to winter most of those. I have some begonias that I'd like to dig up out of the garden because I want to keep those. Um, all the cacti and succulents. I have, a number of those. Many of you wonder what you should do to your plants before bringing them in for the winter, and so I can go through that as well. But because I have a number of different kinds of geraniums potted up, I'm going to start with that first. So I have a big pot here in front of me that held three, or holds three zonal geraniums. They're different kinds. As well, it held some Dusty Miller, which I've cut out most of them, but I've left one. And just to, show you my complete process, I'm just going to move the camera a bit here so you get a good view. I think that should work. So just to give myself access, the first thing I do is cut off the plants, the Dusty Miller that I don't want to keep. Holy smokes, is that ever tough? I brought out the big boys. All right, so I'm going to snip off what I don't need. And then that just gives me a little bit better access to get at the plants that I do want to keep. Now, these geraniums in particular are Calliope geraniums. They're nice, but they're not so great that I want to keep them as basically as house plants or as mother plants. So these are going to go into a paper bag for the winter. As I said, they were okay. I thought I'd be keeping the whole pot as mother plants, but I've decided against that. I do have to, my space of course is limited, either under the grow lights or under or as house plants or what have you. So I do have to sort of determine which I want. The ones that I keep as mother plants are the ones that I'll be wanting to take cuttings of fairly early in the season. Now here, this one is already coming up quite easily out of the soil. And basically I just want to get that root ball. It also helps if you dry these plants down a little before you start the process of putting them in paper bags. So nice roots on that plant. You can see here the original plug. This is why I hate these plugs. The original peat plug that has this papery thing on it is still there. And I find that really does impede the root growth. Actually, had I seen that earlier, I probably would have tried to peel it off earlier. The roots have come from down below, but the ones that are left in there, like underneath that paper stuff, they're sort of all curled up. If you can remove that wrapping, I think it's best. That's to start. The second thing I'm going to do is remove any of these dried leaves. Basically, I'm going to clean up the plant really nicely. So I think you can still see that. I just have a little bucket beneath me where I can put all this stuff. Here I have leaves that have brown spots on them. I'm going to remove those. I'm going to remove any buds like that, as well as any flowers. I'm going to remove those. If they don't snap off, then just giving them a little prune helps. So really what you want, now I'm not going to cut all of the green foliage off. You do want that to remain. But what does remain should not be buds. See, there's another small little bud right in there. You can take that off. And you don't want anything in there that can sort of rot away. And oddly enough, the green growth will not. It'll just dry. And I have one of those big leaf bags right here. And all I do is I'm going to lay it down sideways into this leaf bag. I'm gonna stack them like one this way, and then the next one will have the foliage on this side. So they're going to stack sort of alternately like that. I'm not going to press them down into the bag at all. I'm not going to compact them or anything like that. So again, I'm just going in with my hand and just feeling the bottom of that root ball, and I've gotten it all out. This has a much nicer root structure with soil all around it, but I don't want to keep all that soil on the root ball. I want the root ball to be basically just roots and fairly clean. That's why it's a good idea to let them dry down before you do this. And so I'm just going to tease those roots. This will work pretty much on any zonal geranium, this kind of treatment. I've not found that to be an issue with any of them. But I have found that the bigger the plant, the more success you're going to have. I think from the plants that I wintered like this in a paper bag last year, I'm pretty sure that I had at least 80% success. So out of, say 10 plants, you could count on 8 coming back. And I did find the ones that were the biggest, I had the most success with. So I'm going to cut off all of these flowers. Any of the foliage with a bit of brown on it. Any of these dried stems, give it a shake. Overall, I have not found geraniums to be bothered by any kind of bugs. I've never had aphids on them. I've never had fungus gnats on them. And it might have something to do with that kind of pungent smell of the leaves. They are definitely scented. I did have a ladybug or two that was on there crawling around, but I'm pretty sure they're not finding anything. I don't see anything on here, and I can't say that I've ever had problems with geraniums. I mean, for fungus gnats, they don't like dry soil, and geraniums you tend to keep on the drier side anyway, so that could be part of the reason. So there's my second cutting, or my second plant. This one didn't have all of that paper wrapping or that wrapping around the peat pot, and so this one is just fine just to go in like that. Just nice and dry, and we're not going to water them or anything like that throughout the year. And then the third one, you know, by not keeping them watered right up until the time that you put them in the bag, also starts their kind of dormancy. It sort of forces them into a bit of a dormant period, which is basically what is happening with these geraniums. Other ways that you can winter them, or another way that you could winter geraniums, is to take it pot and all. I would again remove any of the other type of annuals that you have in the pot, but take it pot and all, dry it off, and put it somewhere just cool and dry and dark, and don't water it, or water it very, very sparingly. Dark and cool is probably the key for wintering them if you're not going to winter them as a house plant. If none of those options work for you, you could also at this time take cuttings of these plants and root the cuttings and grow them on if you don't want to take the whole plant. If you took the whole plant and just cut it right back and potted it up, it would regrow as well. Or you could take cuttings, you could winter the whole plant as a mother plant, you could take it in or take it somewhere cool and dry, above freezing, definitely above freezing, and probably above 10 degrees C, but not too warm and not watered. You don't want to promote growth. You want them to go dormant. So geraniums, I think, are probably one of the easiest, most forgiving plants for winter storage or for overwintering in a cold climate. But they will not tolerate being frozen. For now, this bag that I'm putting them in will go downstairs until I'm ready for the next batch. All right, so this one is pretty much also ready to go in the bag, just like that. Now I will check that bag of geraniums probably in about January or February. I'm just going to check them to make sure that there's no mold or anything like that going on. I had no trouble last year. If you have a damp basement or you're putting them into a damp area, you may want to check them more often to make sure. Our basement is very dry, our house is very dry in the winter, and so they are just fine doing it, spending the winter this way. If you don't have one of these bags, you could also use a paper box and close it up. After I fill this bag, I fold it over, and then I just use a couple of bulldog clips just to keep it closed. So now for this glitter pink geranium, I'm not going to do it right now because it's basically going to be the same thing. I'm going to uproot each of these. I'm going to clean off anything yellow or brown or dead looking. I'm going to actually remove all of the flowers and most of the soil from the roots, maybe trim them back slightly, and then I'm just going to repot them into another pot, something slightly smaller, that and they'll spend the winter underneath the lights in my grow room, underneath the grow lights. They sit, all of these that I treat as mother plants, they sit on the floor actually. Our basement is really cool. It goes about 15 degrees C throughout the winter, sometimes a little less, and they seem to really love that dry, cool, bright light, and they will continue to grow that way, although not by leaps and bounds. They do just a little bit more than survive being kept that way, and in that way I can also take cuttings probably in January, February is when I'll take cuttings. But that's basically what I'm going to do with this. Now, if you wanted to keep them in their original pot, you certainly could do that too. But what you'd want to do, is come in and you'd want to remove all of that foliage, and you'd also want to remove any other plants that were in there. And so I'm not going to take it out, but I had some Dusty Miller in here. So that's what I would do if I was going to just continue to keep them in the same pot. I would still remove all of this yellowish growth. What I would not do is cut off the blossoms. If you want to enjoy the blossoms as a houseplant, you can enjoy them for as long as you want to. And at some point, probably in January, they may start lagging. And at that point, you can give them a rest in a cool, dark place for a month or two, and cut way back on watering, or don't water them at all. And then probably about April, you could bring them out into bright light, start watering them again, and they'll just start pushing new growth. And at that point, you could again take cuttings, which are quite easy to do with geraniums, and I do have a video on how to do that. I'll probably be addressing it again at some point in this winter coming up. So that's what you would want to do. Clean it all off really nicely. Then the other thing I have is a couple of these ivy leaf geranium. These differ in a way to the zonal leaf geranium. The zonal geranium are Pelargonium hortatum, and these are Pelargonium peltatum. And I don't think you can treat them the same way as you do zonal geraniums. They have kind of a waxy leaf, and the stems are a little bit more, I'm going to say, brittle, and they're rather, I find, they're rather slow growing. So what I'm going to do with these, I'm not going to attempt putting them into paper bags. I don't think you can. Maybe someday if I get enough of them and I can risk some, then I will try. These are going to also spend the winter in the basement underneath the grow lights. So when the time comes, I will do some cutting back. This one I see has a little bit of a broken stem right there. So I'm just going to take that right away, and that's like the perfect cutting right there. So, which I actually did do with another plant. I had a broken stem. I took this earlier in the summer, and just after I bought the plant, I think maybe it was this plant actually, because I broke a stem almost immediately upon buying it. And I just stuck it in the same pot. Just trying to think of if I can find that now. Yeah, it's right there. So it did root. I do have another plant right here. That's a second root, or a second plant in the same pot. Or that I suspect that it was easier because it was nice and warm. I think that if I were to do the same thing this time, just stick it in the soil like that, if it doesn't have as warm conditions as it had, that cutting may not root, or it may take a great long time for it to root. As it is, when I bring this in, I'm not going to do it just yet. They're actually going to spend probably another week or so outside. When I do bring them in, aside from everything I've talked about, these I would check for bugs, because they are a little bit different. They don't have that sort of soft, fuzzy leaf like zonal does. They have that waxy leaf. When I bring them in, I will probably trim it back and use those trimmings right away to take cuttings, which I'll put on a heat mat, just so that I don't risk. I'm pretty sure they need that warm soil to root. So do geranium, so do zonal leaf. They like a warm soil to root. As for putting cuttings in a glass of water, I've never tried. Perhaps I will try one or two, because I do have some stems that are kind of long, which is of course what you want for an ivy leaf. You do want them to hang nicely, but not for the winter. I don't want that, so I will take them. I will cut those back. I do have another one just hanging right here, and this one I got early in the season as well, and it does have some yellow leaves, dried leaves. See, they break off quite a bit easier than the zonal leaf does. So I'll treat this exactly the same way. I do think that eventually, if I get enough of these, I think those two colors will look quite nice together. I used to live in Europe, and everybody grew these hanging geraniums on the balconies. And so I do love them. I find they're more of a difficult plant to come by. They're certainly more expensive than the regular zonal geraniums, or at least that's what I have found. Anyways, one more geranium I have, and that is this one. This is called, I think, Mrs. Pollock, sorry. And this is, I've mentioned this before, I don't really care for the flowers, these kind of puny orange flowers. It doesn't flower a great deal, but I do absolutely love the variegated foliage on these. This plant is growing nicely overall. It is going to be too tall for my grow lights, because right now with the pot it's standing probably at least 18 inches. And so I'm going to cut this right back, probably by half. I'll cut the stems down by half and root some new cuttings now. So for now, for a little while, it's just going to go in the kitchen bay window, and I'll enjoy it there for a while. I just love that foliage. And then speaking of the bay window, these hibiscus, I've shown you these before, and these hibiscus will also be spending at least a little while in the bay window. I'm going to have to watch them for aphids. I know from past experience that hibiscus can be aphid magnets, and I've also talked about these before, which I'm also bringing in. These are Dipladenia, or also very closely related to mandevilla. They're putting on some nice buds, so I don't know how long the buds last, or the flowers last, but hopefully I'm going to get some enjoyment out of these for a little while at least. I've already repotted them into new potting mix, and I've got these trellises for them as well, just in case they vine up quite a bit. I don't think Dipladenia are supposed to be viney as mandevilla are. So that makes 5 plants for the bay window. I have 2 of these, 2 of the hibiscus, and the Mrs. Pollock geranium, and they will all, at least initially, spend a few months in the kitchen bay window. I also have random houseplants that have been spending the summer outside. This is a Swedish ivy. I've just actually pruned it back, and it's still taking advantage of the highlight here in the greenhouse, and just to push its growth. And I have another type of ivy here. I just can't remember the name of this. There is my spider plant. Now I'll just put a picture up on the screen of what it looked like last year around this time. And then in the spring, when I brought it out, it was looking pretty sad. Anyways, so what I did was, when I brought it out here in about May or so, I cut it all right back to there. And if you didn't know, spider plants are very much like grass. If you give it a big cut, right there is where I cut it, and it responds with all that growth. You can actually see still some new babies sprouting there. So it has spent its time here in the greenhouse, actually just under the bench where it's a little bit darker. I do also have a number of cacti and succulents, and how I've been working on these is basically doing some repotting. I just took a bunch of small ones that I had, and I made up this bigger arrangement instead. I have a few more small ones. I think I'll do basically something similar. I'll just show you the rest of them. I have two areas here where I keep the cacti and succulents for the summer. These are the sun-loving plants, and this is the south deck. This is, I don't know, third or fourth year that they're spending their summers out here. They do very well out here. They put on a lot of growth. Some of them bloom for me. The cacti in particular really, really love it outside during the summertime. But I have already repotted a few of these only because they did put on so much growth during the summer. And I will still have to take care of a few of them. And this is one of the reasons why I like to start a little bit earlier, and I don't like to have to be in a rush to bring them all in. And I don't want to bring them in all ugly looking and then have to deal with them in the house. And back here in the screen room on the north side of the house is where I keep the plants that can tolerate or prefer the lower light conditions. Some of them are succulents. I also have, these are regal geraniums. These I'm also going to treat as houseplants. They are Pelargonium grandiflorum, again, different than zonal geraniums and have to be treated differently to overwinter. So I'm going to overwinter them as well underneath the grow lights. All of those houseplants stay on a big shelving unit in my south-facing bay window in the dining room is where they land up. It's a big structure. It takes up I think it's 4 feet wide and probably 6 feet tall, and it's 4 shelves. I don't have any grow lights on it, but it does. Everything seems to benefit just fine from the sun coming in for the winter. And my video from last year, bringing in houseplants, shows the end result at the end of that video. It actually shows what everything looks like when they're brought in. So I didn't say what I do to some of these plants before I bring them in to control bugs. You know, there could be bugs catching a ride into the house. I treat everything with Endol, and again, I addressed that in a video last year about bringing in houseplants. So Endol is a miticide, insecticide. Controls all stages of aphids, whitefly, scale, spider mites, mealybugs, caterpillars, beetles, chinch bugs, and other listed insects. I bought a big bottle of concentrate, and then I usually just keep a small bottle mixed up. I think it does work. I think you still have to stay on top of it, but I treat all of the cacti, succulents, houseplants. Anyways, that's what my preference is to use. I also use it indoors. I spray them if need be. I spray it in the basement, just in a separate room until they dry. And so that's the other thing about spraying them is to spray them in the shade, not on a sunny day or in the sun. So spray them in a shady spot and leave them in that shady spot until they're dry before you put them back into a sunny spot. And that's actually for if you're spraying anything at all. I also, when I spray alcohol on my plants, I do that in the basement as well. And I leave them in the dark until they're dry and then bring them back upstairs into the sunshine. There are several methods to control fungus gnats as well. You can use mosquito dunks, bits of mosquito dunks, and put them in your watering can. There's also beneficial nematodes or mites that you can buy off Amazon that you, I think, sprinkle on. I've not tried these, but I plan to. You sprinkle on the soil surface. If you live in the United States, there's a product called Bonide, B-O-N-I-D-E. It's a granular product. We can't get it in Canada, unfortunately. I did pick some up and bring some back with me a couple years ago from the United States, and it does work quite well. That gets mixed into the potting soil, and when you repot, works for about 3 months. And that I actually use that mostly to control mealybugs. You can also sprinkle it on the soil surface and just scratch it in, water it, and then it's supposed to work for about 3 months. I think it probably does. The trick is you got to do it. I don't always do it until it's too late. You can also use a drench with, I think it's 1 part hydrogen peroxide to like 9 parts water or something like that. There is a mixture of water to hydrogen peroxide, just regular household hydrogen peroxide that you can drench your plants with, that will kill the eggs, the fungus gnat eggs that are in the soil. This is a tough time of year for fungus gnats as well as fruit flies, and yet, you know, it's difficult sometimes to determine exactly what you have. I'm battling what I call fruit flies in the house right now because they seem to come in on the tomatoes, even though I wash them, you know, immediately upon bringing them in, because it seems that some of the little bugs are underneath the green stem of the tomato, that might, the blossom that might still be attached there. I give everything a really good wash initially, but they seem to survive that, and I still have, I think they're probably fungus gnats. They don't look like, when I look up fruit fly online, they don't look like that with red eyes and a bigger brown body. They don't look like that. They look probably more like a fungus gnat. Anyways, they tend to hitch a ride in, and so this time of year is kind of tough. The last thing that I am going to bring in that I want to address is the Rex begonia. I have 6 Rex begonia that I planted in the soil, but they're going to make nice house plants. So I just want to go dig those up and show you what I'm going to do with them. These have not put on a great deal of growth, not like the other ones I'm going to show you in a minute. And it looks to me like they've suffered just a little bit of slug damage as well. But I think they're worth saving. I expect that they're going to pop out fairly easy because they haven't. They did branch out some. So there is the first one, and I just have 3 of them. Not all, the next 3 are not all in a cluster like those pink ones were. Quite nice. And the third one is right here. This one is the one that got the most sunshine, and I think is the one that actually grew the most. This is quite a bit larger than what I had put in, or at least it seems to me. Quite nice in its growth. So just before potting them up, I just pre-moistened some Pro Mix. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stuff 3 of them into one pot just to make it look nice and full. You saw the root balls, that they aren't very big, and I think that they will be just fine growing kind of tight like this. I don't think they need a whole lot of root space, especially for the winter when they're not going to put on a whole lot of growth. And so there is one, and the second, and the third is right here. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of pressing them in, and then they're going to even, you know, I suspect that they're going to lose a leaf or 2 or 3. Some of them have just a little bit of browning on the leaf edges, so then I just need to backfill just a little in there. But that just shows you that you don't need a whole lot of room. These root balls have a lot of room to go down. There's quite a bit of soil at the bottom, just not a lot around the sides of each. So I think they will do okay. You know, certainly if it looks like they're struggling as winter continues on, I can always repot them into their own separate pots. But I think they look nice, you know, as a nice big plant like that. So that's that one. That's great. So that's something else too that I'm going to bring in for the winter. You know, I think that every day I clean the greenhouse until it's spotless, and then at some point the next day it looks like this. So it's like a never-ending battle for a few weeks for me in the fall to keep the greenhouse clean. I did want to talk about a few other plants that I have wintered in the past, overwintered in the past indoors. And that first one that I want to talk about is petunias. And in particular, I wintered the Supertunia Vista bubblegum petunia. And the way I went about that is I wintered them as potted plants underneath grow lights. I cut them right back. I mean, right back. They had maybe 2 inches of stem. I don't think they even had that. I removed absolutely all of the top growth. And I didn't repot them, although I could have repotted them at the time, but I didn't. And just brought them into the house and I put them under the grow lights. I did keep them watered, but barely, for probably 2 or 3 months. So I was wintering those as mother plants. And so I cut them back. You can repot them or not. And I kept them cool and with very bright light. I used grow lights. And I kept them a little bit on the dry side. I didn't want to encourage a great deal of soft, weak growth. And the growth that did come for the first couple months, I just kept trimming back. And so it was a very low bushy mound. And at some point I started letting them get bigger when I knew that I was going to want to take cuttings. So if you're thinking that you have a very special petunia that you would like to overwinter, that would be my recommendation, is to bring it in as a potted plant, but absolutely cut it right back and then let the growth reflush again. The other plant that people like to bring in is coleus. I mean, they are beautiful for sure. And I think probably one of the best ways to go about that is to take cuttings of those plants. I don't have any coleus, but they're not a whole lot different than this Swedish ivy. They have fleshy sort of stems. You'll want to look for a node like that, and you'll want 2 of those nodes on the plant. You'll cut it below the second one. You'll remove all of this growth from that stem, and then it'll start to send out roots from there. You can do that either in soil or in a glass of water. Coleus root very readily. And if you're not comfortable with taking cuttings of your favorite coleus plant, you can always bring it in. The safest way would be to uproot it and cut it back, wash off the leaves, and then repot it into fresh soil. Or if you wanted to bring it in as a potted plant, you could do that as well and take cuttings a little later in the season. They will require to be set in a very bright location. They can take full sun for sure. Well, I mean, some of the coleus now are bred for full sun. If you have the ones that need to be set in the shade, they could still take full sun in the house at this time of year, and they do need that bright light. They will get leggy, which is, if you bring it in as a plant, and so you just snip those long shoots off and stick them in a glass of water to root, and you will create many more plants by doing that with lots of fresh foliage. Dracaena, or the spikes, those are another plant that you can bring in, and you would treat them just as you would a house plant. Again, they would need a brighter light. They probably will not do quite as well if they're put in a shady corner. And so the begonias that I just potted up, I washed them off and gave them some water outside. Those are called Rex begonia, and they are grown simply for that nice decorative leaf that they have. But there are tuberous begonias. I think most people who grow begonias grow the tuberous begonias. There's also the wax leaf begonias, which are different as well. But the ones that I want to talk about are tuberous begonias. Those begonias that you've bought and that have been growing all summer, if you were to want to winter them just as a tuber and not as a house plant, you would remove the entire plant from the soil before a killing frost, and remove as much of the soil from the tuber as you can. Let that tuber and the stems, or the remaining foliage that's on there, don't pull off the stems just yet, just remove the foliage so that it can dry. And you're going to want that to dry for about 2 weeks in a dark and dry location. And then at some point, those stems are going to be easily removed. Carefully take those stems off, take off any of the rest of any more soil that may be around there, and then just pack each one away in a separate paper bag, like a lunch bag or something like that. And just store that in a cool spot, but nothing that will go below 10 degrees C. Another one is glads. They won't winter outdoors. You have to lift them and dry them and put them in storage for the winter. You want to cut back the stems, all the foliage, and cut back the stems to about 1 inch and let them dry for at least a week until those corms are completely dry. You have to dry them in a spot that is not going to freeze. When you dig them up, the old corm is still going to be attached, as well as a whole bunch of little white bulbils or little white bulbs, which will grow on a few years before that would happen. So you'd want to, after a week or two, and after they're really good and dry, you'll want to peel off that old corm, as well as kind of rub off any of the bulbils that are still attached. And then you will be left just with the gladiola corm. Sometimes you'll have two together, and they should usually separate fairly easily. If they don't separate easily, if it looks like you're going to break them, don't. Just leave them the way they are and plant them that way the following year. And those do best in a cold storage type of situation. Dark, cold storage is best for them. And I used to just put them on one of these trays and just put them in the cold room, and they were fine that way. Sometimes I didn't clean them or do all of that peeling off the corms and stuff. I just put everything in a tray and put it in the cold room, and I kind of let it dry down in there, and then at some point in the winter when I had time, I would do the cleaning. Also, the rhizomes of canna lilies and calla lilies can be wintered just in storage, and you'd want to pull those before you're first killing frost. You'll cut the stems down to about 3 inches and let those rhizomes dry out really well, just like the tuberous begonias. So probably a week or two, you're going to want them to dry down very well, and then they can be packed away in sand or vermiculite, shredded paper perhaps. They need to have something packed around them, not just dry storage. The callas should be kept above 10 degrees C, not in cold storage like you would the glads. And so perhaps something like you would be storing the geraniums in an area that doesn't get really, really cold, but it's very cool. That's for calla lilies, and canna lilies can take a storage temperature more like around 5 degrees C. I'm sure there's many other plants that can be wintered. I didn't touch on dahlias at all because I don't grow dahlias. I have stored dahlias in the past, not everything successfully, and that's why I'm saying I'm not the best one. I don't have a great deal of knowledge or experience with dahlias, so I'm not going to advise you on that. However, I will say that if you have dahlias, if you're growing dahlias, don't expect them to overwinter in the soil. In zone 3, you're going to have very little chance of them not just turning into mush over a cold zone 3 winter. Thanks for hanging out today, and I hope you enjoyed the video, found something interesting or informative or helpful in some way. And if you did, give me a thumbs up, tell your friends, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you.